Paranormal Activity rewrote the book on how found-footage horror movies are made. But things might have been very different if the first film's original ending stayed put. The ending of Paranormal Activity that most people are familiar with is the one that was included during the film's wide release. On the second-to-last night of the story, the character Katie is pulled from her bed by seemingly nothing. As Katie's screams echo throughout the hall, Mika rushes to save her. When attempting to see if she's alright after her attack, Mika notices a large bite mark on her back, even though she insists she's alright. But the following night proves this is far from true. On the final recorded night, Katie wakes up in a trance. After staring at a sleeping Mika for about 2 hours before going downstairs, Katie lets out a blood-curdling scream. When Mika rushes to her aid, he lets out a yell and presumably falls to the ground. In the film's most memorable moment, we sit in silence for nearly a full minute before Katie flings Mika into the camera, knocking it over. She hovers over him before lunging at the camera herself, showing audiences that she has indeed been possessed by the demon that's been haunting them. A closing text confirms that Mika's body was found 3 days later and that Katie has disappeared. With this ending, the filmmakers had an open hook for potential sequels. And sequels there were. And while this ending is an effective closer which gives us an incredible jolt, the person truly responsible for turning this indie horror film into a long-running franchise is not the film's writer and director Oren Peli, but the legendary Steven Spielberg, who wasn't a fan of the original ending. Spielberg convinced Paramount to provide Peli with funds to create another ending before release. And if Paranormal Activity had retained any of its other alternative endings, we would be talking about this film very differently. There are essentially 3 alternate finales, only 2 of which were actually filmed. According to Entertainment Weekly, the unfilmed ending would have seen Katie picking up the camera and bashing in Mika's face. It would have made for an abrupt and gory conclusion, one that arguably doesn't fit with the film's minimalist tone. The second alternative ending, which is what Spielberg saw, sees Katie come upstairs after presumably killing Mika. She sits beside the bed, cradling herself back and forth into the next day. You can hear her friend Amber coming to check in on them, only to scream in horror at the discovery of Mika's body. About a half hour later, 2 police officers enter the home and find Katie. She wakes from her disoriented trance, but due to her approaching them with a bloodied knife, she's predictably shot dead. This sad conclusion doesn't give Katie the autonomy to explain what happened, and is along the lines of what might be expected while watching actual disturbing home footage. However, the third alternative ending is perhaps the most chilling. After Mika is stabbed downstairs, we hear Katie's footsteps as she climbs the stairs. Once she enters the room, she then stands in front of the camera and, with a bone-chilling smile, slits her throat with her knife. The silence afterwards is unsettling, as it sinks in that this demon only wanted to violate this couple's life for fun before disposing of them like a kid who's become bored of their Christmas toys. Not only do these different paths provide different conclusions to Paranormal Activity as a film, but their existence fundamentally alters the core mythology at the heart of what would become the Paranormal Activity franchise. The Paranormal Activity series launched with no overarching plan to build up to something greater, only to keep audiences coming back for more. In the documentary Unknown Dimension, which chronicles the history and making of the Paranormal Activity series, the creative teams for the sequels admit that each movie was written during filming, with no predestined plan as to how the franchise would ultimately end. The fact that Paranormal Activity was able to keep things running for as long as it did is impressive, despite falling flat in its face with an attempt at 3D with Paranormal Activity: The Ghost Dimension. Paranormal Activity 2 came as a surprise due to its slow reveal as a prequel, focused on Katie's sister Christy and her family, before showing what happened to Katie after the events of the first film. Paranormal Activity 3 goes all the way back to 1988, when the hauntings first began during Katie and Christy's childhood. The basic gist of the first trilogy is that Katie and Christy were unknowingly inducted into a cult by their grandmother, who offered them to the entity Toby at a young age to provide him with a male heir to inhabit. In the second film, Christy gives birth to Hunter, the first male born into the family in ages. Had Paranormal Activity been a one-and-done experience, the most we would have gathered is that this entity would have been targeting Katie alone. But the second film reveals that Christy giving birth to Hunter makes her the focus of the demonic haunting, and the only way to get rid of Toby was to pass it to Katie, setting the first Paranormal Activity into motion. But her choice doesn't ultimately matter when the possessed Katie comes back, kills Christy and her husband, and leaves with Hunter. As the sequels move away from solely focusing on Katie's immediate family, Katie's role as the series throughline gets increasingly more convoluted. While Paranormal Activity 4's attempt at a switcheroo with Hunter suffers from poor writing, Paranormal Activity The Marked Ones is where things get interesting, being the entry that ends while introducing time travel. The lead characters of The Marked Ones are attacked by cult members at Katie's grandmother's home. Scared for his life, the character Hector runs inside a closet and emerges in a completely different location on the other side. It doesn't take long before we realize that we're in Katie's house right before she kills Mika. For the first time, we get to see what happened downstairs on that fateful night.
Excuse me, I need your help, please.
The ending to The Marked Ones implies that Katie snapped due to the sudden presence of a stranger in her home in the middle of the night. But we know Katie was possessed by Toby at this point, so we end up with a nod to the first film that, while clever, doesn't entirely come together. But introducing time travel comes with its own set of complications. Paranormal Activity could have remained this singular piece of horror, but by dismissing its other possible endings in favor of a loose end, it allowed subsequent films to try out new ideas. Some successful, some not.